I am Iron Man. Okay, seriously. Ugh. All silliness aside. Whoa! Now this thing won't turn off. Anyway, guys, Professor Bell, Comic Book University, being attacked by my Iron Man toy repulsor thing. Guys, this is my third podcast, and what I want to talk about here, still wearing my Iron Man shirt, is I want to talk about the last issue of Civil War, issue number 8. Now, this is Civil War 2, mind you. This issue we waited for a really long time for, so it was really anticlimactic in the sense that we already knew that Tony Stark was going to die. We knew that Doctor Doom was taking over for him in infamous Iron Man, and we knew that Riri Williams was now the inheritor of the soul of Iron Man, I suppose, Tony Stark, in the form of his consciousness downloaded onto an AI. So we already knew all of this stuff going on. We knew that the events of Civil War led to Miles Morales and Sam Alexander, Nova, and who else was it? Oh, Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel. All of these guys, they just up and left the Avengers and said, forget about this, man. We're joining a new team, the Champions, right? And the events, from elsewhere, Scott Summers said, forget about the X-Men, I'm leaving, I'm going to join the Champions also, and all sorts of other good stuff. So we saw the fallout long before the actual comic came out, so anticlimactic to say the least. We were actually kind of upset and a little bit bored, I was at least. But re-looking at it, reviewing it, and revisiting it, I suppose, and on top of that, I saw an article in Business Insider, Business Insider UK, in fact. You can go and look it up. And it's about the similarities between the main last scene of the Civil War II, issue number 8, in an 8-issue limited series, where the Pieta, I'm probably not pronouncing it right either way, but this is the statue. Probably easier to just show you. So if you're actually watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see the images right now of the Pieta. This is actually in the Basilica of St. Peter in the Vatican City. And then you can also see this image of Miles Morales holding Tony Stark. And I'll try and bounce the image back and forth a couple of times so that you can see that, yeah, man, this is actually meant to be the exact same picture. And you kind of have the saints up in the background, right? Watching on, either on ground or even in the air. So saints on the ground and angels in the air and the cherubim and the seraphim. And it's a really religious scene when you think about it, and I think it bypassed a lot of us. It even bypassed me. I looked at the scene, I was just like, oh, okay, so it was actually Miles holding the body of Tony Stark as opposed to holding the body of Steve Rogers, because that's what the vision was that led to this civil war between Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, and Tony Stark, Iron Man. That's what led to the clash, was this futurism idea. And now, mind you, Tony Stark is supposed to be the futurist. He's supposed to be the one who's always looked to the future and seen what the truth was. But now Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, actually gets a soothsayer, in sense, the Inhuman who's able to see into the future. Now, we knew that there were problems with this, and we knew also that he couldn't see everything. Couldn't see that, what's her name, the She-Hulk was going to get knocked into a coma. And you could look at her new comic, The Hulk, issue number 1 just came out last week. You can see what's happening there. She's suffering through PTSD. Hey, we weren't able to see that by looking in the future. We were able to see that the Hulk was going to have some big influence on the things that went on. I don't quite think it was the way that they expected it to be, though. Was he actually going to Hulk out and freak out and destroy everyone? Well, no, instead, Hawkeye was part of the contingency plan of Bruce Banner, one of the smartest men on Earth, and he killed him with a gamma ray form of an arrow and took him out. I'm kind of all over the place here. Trying to rein this in, there was a lot of things that they couldn't see, including James Rhodes' death. We weren't able to see that. That's War Machine. we weren't able to see his death in advance. So to say that the visions of the future were limited in the least, that's, I mean, geez, that's no small response to say that he couldn't see everything. But in the end, he was picked up by eternity. And it said, okay, you've done all that you're going to do on this earth. Why don't you come with us now? And he kind of ascended into the heavens. So that was kind of different. I literally did not expect that. And he didn't have a vision of that. I'm just going to point that out, at least not one that was interpreted the correct way. So a lot of really crazy stuff going on here. But now they're trying to give this impression that Miles Morales is the Virgin Mary, or at least the representation, and Stark is supposed to be Jesus? Ooh, yeah, I have a big problem with this. And I'm not even talking from a religious aspect at all. I know this is religion, but honestly, this is actually going to be a fairly large subject, and I'm going to just try and dive right into it. Miles Morales, I can see as sort of a Virgin Mary. He came to this planet from the Ultimate Universe, the Earth 616, and he came to this, I guess we could still call Earth 616. He came from Earth 1610, I should say. That's the Ultimate Universe. These were the two universes, the two planets that collided in the incursions, and yeah, that's what led to the Secret Wars, and that's what led to where we are now. So that's the soft reboot that we basically had last year. Now, a lot of weird things going on here, guys. The idea that's saying that Tony Stark, and I don't know if that's actually what Brian Michael Bendis is saying here, because mind you, he was the writer. He was the sole writer of this entire series. But this particular comic had 8 pencilers and 8 inkers and 3 colorists. I can't remember the last time I saw a single comic that had that many contributors to the art section. I mean, you think about that, man. That's 19 people. 19 people assigned to, and that's not including the letterer. that absolutely is art. And go back and see the video I just made recently about Artie Simek to see the contributions of writers in this, or excuse me, of letterers in this. But my point being that we don't know if that is actually the drawing that Brian Michael Bendis actually wanted to be represented. So maybe it was just some artist taking some liberties and making that little symbolism there to look like that. But I'm going to assume that he did. So now I'm curious. I would love to be able to sit down and have an interview with Brian Michael Bendis and ask him, you know, is this actually what you meant to be seen here? Because, like, case in point, the biggest scene of spousal domestic abuse in comics that everybody always refers back to is Hank Pym hitting the Wasp. And it's already been established through many sources, all conferring with each other independently, that wasn't the way that it was meant to be drawn. They didn't want it to be drawn like that. Yes, he was supposed to hit her, but it was more like a, you know, get away from me kind of thing, as opposed to actually a backhand and pimp slap, knock her to the ground kind of thing. I mean, whoo! So they just kind of ran with that. And Hank Pym has been a bad guy ever since. Now he's Ultron. So, whoo. That's kind of heavenly too, right? The father and the son joining, and now, oh no, what if Tony Stark's AI actually joins up with them? Then here's the Holy Ghost, and those 3 meet up. Oh, this is horrible. We'll have an evil trinity. But anyway, man, I'm all over the place with this in my mind. But this is some interesting symbolism, and if this is what Bendis was actually playing at, because all the pieces seem to fit into place, man. I mean, you have Tony Stark, who I always saw him as evil. I've always, not evil, evil's a bit too far, but I've always seen him as the bad guy, even in his own comics. You know, when the Demon in the Bottle thing happened, you felt sorry for him, but that went on for a while. It was a single issue, but the storyline itself went on to the current day, basically, that he is an alcoholic. Recovering, but, you know, he slips and just, you know, whatever. But the point is that he's an alcoholic. And when Rhodey came along and started trying to take his place as Iron Man, because the world needed an Iron Man, he took over that, the Silver Centurion armor, the red and silver one, the Mark 7. He took that armor over, and he took the place of Iron Man, and nobody knew that he was actually Iron Man. He didn't let it be known. He never took off the helmet and the voice modulator inside. Who can recognize, I mean, come on. Nobody's going to decipher that. So he was Iron Man, and then eventually Tony Stark started to get angry and jealous at him, and he started getting his own armor on. And then of course later on we found out that Rhodey also had a little problem because his brain waves weren't synced to the Iron Man armor the right way, which is an interesting play on the difference between the novel for the accompanying novel for Iron Man 2 and the actual movie Iron Man 2, because they showed that Rhodey took the armor, but he didn't have a problem with it being synced. Now, they didn't say anything about it. It was literally just a moot point in the movie. But if you read the book, there are two main revelations there that was interesting. One is that he created the element called vibranium. They clearly had to scrap that because, well, no, they wanted to be, Black Panther, Wakanda, and all that stuff. But the idea is that he also had the brainwaves already synced for that second set of armor that Rhodey stole. He already had the brainwaves synced to that, and Nick Fury questioned him on that. He's like, well, it's interesting that his brainwaves were already synced for that so that he could take the armor in the first place. And Stark just says, oh, gee, I don't know what you're talking about. Obviously brushing it off, So it's interesting the light that it gave on that Rhodey actually wasn't the bad guy in stealing that armor, In the movie, he just looked like a thief, and Stark winds up looking like the good guy. I know that in the movie, Stark always looks like he's the good guy, and for the most part, yeah, he kind of is, except in the Civil War, where he's just clearly off the boat again and totally playing by emotions. But in the comics, he's almost always the bad guy. I mean, got to the point where, if you remember the first Armor Wars, even the second Armor Wars, he wasn't exactly a good guy, but in the first Armor Wars, here's the Ghost who comes along and takes his information. Probably the only interesting storyline that the Ghost has ever been in, ever. And even then, it wasn't about his character. It was more just, he was a plot line. He's the plot point, that the Ghost comes in and steals his tech. Stark finds out much later on as an afterword, and then he went and sold his armor ideas to other people, and Stark goes around. He goes to Project Pegasus and goes after the Guardian. He goes after what's his face, Stingray, probably the only time you've ever heard of the Stingray also, right? Goes after him, and the Stingray, hey, isn't that the guy who fought against the Triton one time? Yeah, who's the Triton also, right? The Triton from the green scaly guy from the Inhumans. But, these are mostly minor characters until the very end shows up, or he fights against the Crimson Dynamo, and that's in the stealth armor, and then especially all of a sudden Titanium Man shows up, and that was a huge deal, right? And then of course later on the final bad guy, which was absolutely not necessary for the comic at all, but he even fought against Captain America in that. He fought against Cap, right? After he just gave him that other shield, the replacement shield, because Cap had left. Many times Marvel has tried to get away from and switch characters up, right? But so he actually goes after Cap. Cap goes and says, hey, listen, man, what are you doing? You're going all over the place, and I'm not for the government. Clearly, I left Captain America because I'm not going to be a slave of the government, but what you're doing is actually treasonous. You need to answer for this. You need to actually tell people what you're doing. At least tell me. And Stark says, I don't have time to tell you, but he does have time to shoot him and blast him and stuff like that. It could have even been like dude, you got to trust me. No, he's always been the bad guy. The Avengers actually had to go back in time and get a younger Tony Stark to combat the current Tony Stark, and Tony Stark tried to kill his younger self. Dude, Stark has almost always, and this is all in his own comics. These are all stories from his own comics I'm talking about. So it's not even like, the writer for the Captain America comic did such and such. No. That's all the writers for the Tony Stark Iron Man comics. He's always been either on the very edge of being a bad guy or a flat-out bad guy in and of himself, right? I mean, wow. So yeah, all of the problems that the Avengers have had, for the most part, a lot of them can be traced back to him, minus Ultron, that's Pym. But even in the movies, they made that Stark, so I don't even know what to say, man. He's always kind of been the bad guy, so making him kind of this messianic, there's a word for that, I can't remember right now. Messianic video. Anyway, so the point is that he was kind of like the Messiah. Messianic, there we go. He was basically the Messiah type figure here, and then his ghost appears, and he's able to leave the cave, right? So that the cave is empty of the body, right? If you read the Bible at all, and Jesus Stark, right? Tony Christ, basically, is going to go on to. Is Riri Williams now going to be his messenger? Because that would be horrible. That would be terrible if she's now like, the messenger. She's like the St. Paul character of all of this. Paul, who was Saul. She was never really a bad guy, ever. I can't even say really. She was never a bad guy. She's a new character, and we know of her past she was a good guy. So what is this? And Dr. Doom kind of comes in. Maybe what's interesting, I think, is that a lot of people would see this as he's an antichrist sort of character. I don't see that at all. I don't see that at all, because Dr. Doom he's not even inverted at this point. He's chosen to try and make up for all of his wrong deeds. And that's noble. That's noble. You can't say that he would probably be the Paul character, actually, because he was the bad guy. He was the bad guy when he was Saul. He was the bad guy, Dr. Doom. And then he was inverted, whatever. He became God, in the Marvel Universe. And then he left it because it wasn't what he wanted. And he came down and he says, okay, if I'm going to leave Reed Richards to be God, essentially, and put the universe back in order, back the way it was, right? The smartest man on Earth, the best that he could do was, let's just make it like it was before. At least it was interesting under Dr. Doom with Battle World. But so Doom kind of falls to Earth. So maybe he's kind of like the Satan character, because he fell to Earth. He challenged and then he came back down. Maybe. But I definitely don't see him as the Antichrist character. You're going to love who I say for this, because here's an interesting part. There's one part in Civil War 2, issue number 8 of 8, where Captain Marvel is standing there face to face with Stark and with Miles Morales, and she's talking, right? And she's basically trying to argue her point, but it's not being heard. Her point isn't being heard. At one point, she says to Captain America, Steve Rogers, says, "Tell him that I'm not Satan." Interesting point that I would have completely overlooked this if I didn't see this particular article. Tell him I'm not Satan, and Cap says she's not Satan. And then there's another thing going on, there. But the point is, it's interesting that she asked Cap, because Cap is supposed to be the moral figurehead of everybody. He's always been. Just a couple issues before this, in an earlier Civil War, was it issue 5, maybe 6? I think it was 5, but the Black Panther finally leaves Captain Marvel's team, and there's a bigger incident in the Ultimates, the Ultimates 2. But he actually leaves, and he says, "I'm going to go over here on Stark's side." And she's like, "Why are you going to join Stark? Stark's not right." She says, "Okay, but Captain America is on his team. And at the end of the day, I'm not so much as joining Stark's team. I'm rather joining Captain America, Steve Rogers' team. Because if there's one thing I've learned in all my time as ruler of Wakanda and not, is that if you're on the side of Captain America, you are on the side of morality." Which is a boom, a huge punch, which just, wow. Here's the really messed up thing. Hail Hydra. Right? That's what they always do. They got the Hail Hydra, right? It's always the Hail Hydra. They're hailing, he's hailing Hydra. He's a secret member of Hydra right now. It's not an aversion. This is long after the aversions of Axis. No. Right now, this crazy storyline going on with Cubix, he's not a Rubik's Cube, his name is Cubix, the Cosmic Cube. She changed Captain America. He's not old Cap Steve Rogers anymore. Now he's young Steve Rogers, so he retook the mantle of Captain America, got a new shield, a very cool shield, separation, like the Enterprise had a separation thing, the big disc. But very interesting, the Captain America now, but he's changed. The Red Skull influenced Kubik enough that she changed Steve Rogers' past. So now he's actually evil. He's a member of Hydra. He's still doing his Captain America thing. He's still technically doing good guy things. Some things are questionable, what he's doing. Some things are very questionable. Like, for instance, the killing of Nomad. That was very questionable. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if we found out later on that, nope, Nomad was actually a bad guy. So it still fit into the good guy, Steve Rogers' plans. I don't think he's really a bad guy. And I really hope that they don't prove me wrong, because it's Captain America, man. Like, just rip this off and there's a big shield tattoo on my chest, in my mind at least. But in reality, I'm looking at this and I'm saying he's not really a bad guy. But currently, he is a bad guy. Oh, it breaks my heart. He's technically a bad guy. He's at least being portrayed as a bad guy here. And why do I say that he's sort of the Antichrist character here? Because he's the chosen one. Hydra was sitting there talking. We got him, we got Steve Rogers, young Steve Rogers, and young Baron Zemo the 13th, okay, hiding in the bushes, while his dad, Baron Zemo the 12th, and what's his name, the Kraken, is talking, and a couple of, major Hydra bad guys are sitting there talking. And they're saying, okay, Zemo's just back from Germany, and, word is that there's this guy Hitler showing up, and he's taking power fast in Germany, and he's got great weapons that are far surpassing what, regular Earthlings are doing. And what's more than that is, oh yeah, he's also the, he's summoning, evil demons and things like that, and really getting into the occult. And we think that he might be the chosen one in the Hydra prophecies. So I think that we should follow him. It's like, oh, but he's not a Hydra guy. No, he's not. And he either follows us, or after we've helped him to rule the world, then we'll simply kill him and take all of his stuff. We'll usurp and we'll take over. That was always pretty much the ideology of Hydra. Excuse me. So that's there. So some of them are voting, okay, let's do that. But then it's also suggested that no, the real chosen one is right here in this school, and it's Steve Rogers. They're saying that Captain America is actually the real chosen one for Hydra. That's kind of a big deal. So that kind of makes him the Antichrist. Now, I mean, even if you look at, Nostradamus prophecies, he said that there would be 3 great antichrists, and the third one would be the worst of them all. The first one was supposed to be Napoleon Bonaparte, right? And the second one was supposed to be Adolf Hitler. And the third one would be, we haven't come across him yet, or maybe we have, but the third one was supposed to be the worst one of them all. And, he's the one, be careful. And, oh my God, he'd be in blue and silver, according to him. But the point is that, yeah, this is forget about the prophecies of Nostradamus. It's just an interesting little aside. The idea is that Hydra thinks that Hitler is supposed to be the Antichrist, basically the chosen one. But they're saying that no, it's actually Steve Rogers. And Steve is doing his own thing, and he's trying to overthrow the Red Skull. But apparently it's because he's really trying to overthrow it, to take over, right? He's not trying to beat up the Red Skull and get rid of him. He's trying to depose him so that he could take over. I'm hoping that's just he's trying to take over so that he could destroy it from the inside, kind of like Luke Skywalker. He fell to the dark side, in the expanded universe, just simply so that he could switch it around and destroy it from the inside. I'm hoping this is going to be a very similar case. But in the meantime, he's kind of the Antichrist in this. So when Carol asks him, or tells him, tell him I'm not Satan, he says, she's not Satan. That was a very interesting, it's like, oh no, you guys are, the one time you shouldn't be trusting Captain America is the one time everybody's saying, just ask Cap. Oh, this is horrible. But I don't know, to me, it's very interesting the way that this is all working. Yeah, Stark is rising from his tomb. He goes back over there. Dr. Doom, meanwhile, Dr. Doom kind of seems to be like the Paul character, in that the Paul Saul character, that he was bad and now he's a good guy. He's wearing the armor of Iron Man. So if Iron Man, if Tony Stark is supposed to be this Jesus-esque character, look at what they're actually doing here, right? It seems to fall into place, and maybe I'm just, maybe a lot of us are just trying to put the pieces in, but they do kind of fall in pretty easily. I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist here at all. Like, I'm really not. But, oh, this is really, really weird. Stark has always had that kind of, not even just Messiah complex. He really did always think that he was God. I mean, during the inversion, when Tony Stark had said at the one point, and this was like the climax of Tony Stark for the most part, where it's like, yeah, he needs to be stopped. But it was the coolest line that Tony Stark had ever said. He said, "You guys think that I'm playing God? No, I've been playing human." And I don't remember if he actually said human, maybe he said mortal or whatever, but the idea was that he actually insinuated in no small way that he is God. So, is he Messiah? No. Does he think he's the Messiah? Oh, hell yeah. He thinks he's God's gift, if not his own gift to humanity, for crying out loud. So, there's always been that somewhat religious, sort of biblical thing going on with Stark, and I enjoy seeing this unfold the way that it does. Obviously, if he becomes too religious, there's going to be a problem. And mind you, the religion classes, we haven't actually built those sections yet for Comic Book University, so we're not teaching that here. I'm not trying to propagate anything, and I really don't want it propagated. That's not what I'm here for. So whatever your religion, whatever your denomination in said religion, it's not even, it's just about individual interpretation, so just looking at it the way it is. I am interested in knowing the mind of Bendis right now, because I'm floored by how well this seems to be folding in with itself. The idea that Stark is the good guy in all of this is, I suppose, maybe it's about time, right? But mind you, this doesn't mean that Carol is the bad. I almost said Carl like a Walking Dead. Carl! But Carol Danvers, Miss Marvel, Captain Marvel, she's Captain Marvel now. I don't believe that she's the bad guy in this at all. In fact, even Beast had to kind of interpret the word of God, Tony Stark, in the sense of, he never thought that you were the bad guy in this, Carol. He never thought that you were the bad guy. He never thought that you were good. All this power that you were getting, just like he was getting back in the original Civil War, he kept on getting more power, and power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? There's some Abraham Lincoln for you, versus Spyro Agnew. But the idea is that he says, interpreting the word, he says, Stark didn't see your acquisition of power as being bad. He was questioning the position itself, because when you're gone, if something happens to you, if you quit, if you're killed, if something happens to you, who's going to take your place? And think about it. Who would know better than him? Well, all the people who had to suffer when he was in charge. But when he was the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Secret Invasion happened, at the very end, it was Norman Osborn who wound up becoming the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. And he got his own form of power. He changed into Hammer, and all sorts of crazy things happened. But Stark was, in his own mind at least, he was benevolent. He was a jackass, but he was benevolent, right? And all that power was okay in his hands. And Cap saw it from the very beginning. The same thing that was in the movie Civil War is the same thing that Cap had said in the comic The Civil War. Listen, man, it's not about you. It's about the more power you give somebody, what happens after you, right? What happens next? The person who takes over after you, you're giving that person all that power. And I mentioned it in my review of Civil War II, issue number 8, that you kind of look at modern day. We've kind of given freeway, right, of the Privacy Act, kind of overrules habeas corpus, which, for crying out loud, habeas corpus was one of the things that we talked about in the Magna Carta. I mean, that's a document that predates the Constitution, and it was the one of the founding principles there that we the people brought to the King of England and said, listen, man, here's the deal. You can't be taking us off the street and trying us without, right, that habeas corpus. And that was, of course, in the Constitution, right, back in 1776, right? And, oh my God, and now suddenly we've lost, there's a back door around habeas corpus so that it technically doesn't really exist. It's there in name only, but you've actually got to fight for habeas corpus now. And now we're kind of handing that over, right? We thought it was going to go to from one regime to the next regime, to an actual regime, and instead it went elsewhere. If you're following politics, I mean, if you're just alive and breathing, you know what I'm talking about. I don't want to get too political, but like, look at what we've done now. Now we're handing this off to someone who who wasn't intended to have it, and now there's nothing that we could do about it because law's been passed. You know, like, what are you going to do with a lame duck session? So it's very interesting, the relationship, and this article actually mentions that maybe we can see Hillary Clinton in Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel. I don't see that at all. I absolutely do not see it at all. And I definitely don't see Tony Stark as being like Donald Trump. In fact, Brian Michael Bendis, who wrote this entire storyline, he'd said in an earlier tweet, and it's actually mentioned here, I remember the tweet, he'd said at one point, and this is not from me, again, this is from Brian Michael Bendis. I don't want to get involved in my individual opinions and things like that, but Michael Bendis said, oh yeah, Tony Stark and Trump are kind of the same. If Tony Stark wasn't a billionaire and wasn't a philanthropist and wasn't a genius and was basically just, yeah, nothing like, the other. So, yeah, Brian Michael Bendis clearly did not. I don't care what the article says or what, somebody else might say. My opinion is, no, he didn't look at this as a political kind of thing, because if Captain Marvel was supposed to be Hillary Clinton, which I don't see it, he clearly never intended Stark to be like Trump. So I don't see that relationship, that connection at all. I do see this as kind of religious, like loosely based on religion. And hey, every writer, right, for the most part, is going to back up on something that's already established. And not too much is more established than the Bible, right? So I found this interesting. Guys, I'd really like to know what you think. If you agree with me, if you agree with Business Insider UK, again, that's the article this is mostly coming from, I would like you to mention in the comments, what do you think who do you think each character represents? You'd obviously have to know, your Bible a little bit, not just, dogma or other people's opinions. No, you actually had to have read the Bible a little bit to understand the individual characters that are in here, right? Do you see any other similarities with these characters? Do you think that I'm a little bit off? Do you think that there's another character that somebody could actually represent? Do you think that there are other characters that I'm missing that have a place in here and that will have a place in here? Because it's just like they always say with Marvel Cinematic Universe, and like has always been the case with Marvel, it is all connected. So this is not going to end here. I really want to see where else this is going. I do want to hear you guys' opinions on this, guys. Shoot me a comment. Let's see what's going on. Professor Bell, Comic Book University. Class dismissed.